All right. Hello. My name is Alan Polk, Asia Division Director for WISHH, a program of the American Soybean Association. Thank you today for joining us for the first of 3 webinars this week. Today's webinar topic is on food safety, featuring Dr. Haley Oliver, a Purdue University professor. Hopefully, you will not have any technical issues or challenges during the webinar, but if you do, here are some tips to help you out. First, you can submit them using the chat feature found in the Q&A box. Another tip is to refresh your web page, or you could check your internet connection. As a last resort, you can restart your web browser or computer. Hopefully these tips will help you if you encounter some technical issues during the webinar. Food safety is an important subject that can be challenging for food processors and even more relevant during this time of COVID-19. Throughout this webinar, think of how you can either implement or strengthen your company's food safety plan. Throughout the presentation, you can post your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them during the Q&A section following the presentation. And after the webinar is ended, please stay logged on for a short survey. Next is a video that details WISH's mission and the work we do.
Do you see potential for economic progress that also improves human and animal nutrition in countries with some of the fastest growing populations in the world? Do you want to partner to find solutions for the protein gaps found in Africa, Asia, and Central America? If you can join us in capturing business opportunities in nutritious foods and feeds, then stay tuned. Visionary U.S. soybean growers founded the World Initiative for Soy in Human Health, or WISHH, as a program of the American Soybean Association. We are committed to strengthening agricultural market systems in developing and emerging economies in order to improve food security and build long-term demand for U.S. soy. Our work supports businesses, governments, and non-governmental organizations from Guatemala to Uganda to Cambodia to introduce nutritious foods and feeds that grow their businesses and economies. At WISHH, we focus on regions where U.S. soy markets don't exist yet, blazing new trails in new sectors around the world. For example, WISHH has made significant impacts in Central America by partnering with companies that use U.S. soy to manufacture more nutritious foods and beverages. In Asia, WISHH partners have expanded their businesses by putting U.S. soy in fish feed for the first time. And in sub-Saharan Africa, local entrepreneurs have partnered with WISHH to grow businesses that sell delicious and nutritious soy-based local foods, as well as feeds for poultry, fish, and more. So what can a partnership with WISHH do for you? Working on behalf of U.S. soybean farmers, our goal is to create global partnerships and provide new opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs that expand the potential for trade. Our approach is designed to increase demand, fuel economic growth, and connect entrepreneurs. The best part is that we do this at no cost to you. So how does it work? Thanks to decades of accumulated knowledge, we tap into expert resources to educate, mentor, and network to help your business grow both in size and through the latest innovations. Thanks to our soy experts, who are deeply connected to the regions where we work, we offer you face-to-face education and technical expertise. Working in developing and emerging markets, we identify market sectors with real potential for growth, work with key stakeholders, and provide effective trade solutions. While serving as an incubator, we connect driven leaders with supply chain partners. We help you network for strategic partnerships and create opportunities to launch a new product or service. And our go-to market strategists offer a localized approach, the right resources, the right expertise, and the right systems for better nutrition and improved food security in your market. At WISHH, our greatest strength is our ability to facilitate strategic partnerships throughout the world to promote the benefits of soy. WISHH and the American Soybean Association have the vision and the voice to continue to build awareness, create partnerships, and drive change for a healthier world.
All right. Now I'd like to introduce Liz Hare, WISH's Executive Director, for her opening comments.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Hare, the Executive Director of the WISHH program, the World Initiative for Soy and Human Health at the American Soybean Association. WISHH was founded 20 years ago by visionary U.S. soybean farmers who saw a rapidly changing world and wanted to find a way for U.S. soy to respond to growing demands for quality protein across the globe. WISHH has grown these last 2 decades through the ongoing support of U.S. soybean farmers and their soybean checkoff programs. From Africa to Asia to Central America, WISH's founders saw protein's growing role for nutrition and economic progress in developing and emerging markets. Together with strategic partners like many of you participating in today's webinar, we work to connect trade and development across market systems, improving food security. We are eager for the day when we can join you all again in person as we work toward common goals that capitalize on the power of protein in foods and feeds. At WISHH, we prefer face-to-face interactions. We are used to hosting international trade teams and trainings here in the United States, and we miss visiting many of you in the places where you all work. We are glad to have many familiar faces as well as newcomers to WISHH joining our first virtual webinar series. Welcome to all of you. WISHH is hosting these webinars as part of our Mobilizing Entrepreneurs initiative, which is funded by the United Soybean Board. Our series is designed to provide new insights to assist entrepreneurs in overcoming obstacles in global supply chains. We are pleased that our first webinar features the director of the U.S. Agency for International Development Food Safety Innovation Lab, which is jointly housed at Purdue University and Cornell University. Dr. Haley Oliver holds a Ph.D. in food science and received bachelor's degrees in both molecular biology and microbiology. Her work has supported food safety in Senegal, Kenya, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Nepal, and Afghanistan. WISH's 2019 food safety training sessions in Myanmar also featured Dr. Oliver. Dr. Oliver has won multiple awards for her teaching and lectures, so we have much to look forward to today. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Haley Oliver here to share the latest insights on food safety. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Oliver.
Hi, my name is Haley Oliver, and I'm a professor of food science at Purdue University. And it's my pleasure today to talk with you about how we can uphold food safety during one of the most challenging global threats to food and food security, the COVID-19 pandemic. And the things we'll talk about today really are strategies that both small and medium-sized food and beverage producers can use to protect their workforce, which inherently protects the food supply. So a couple of items that we'll cover in the next 40 minutes or so are, what is SARS-CoV-2 and how does that relate to a more common term that we discuss, COVID-19 and the COVID-19 pandemic? We'll also take a look at the interface between food safety and COVID-19 and how we need to focus on worker safety as a big part of food safety. Social distancing, which is a new word that has certainly entered a number of vocabularies, is a major way that we can protect the workforce and also enhance food safety, as well as proper face coverings and the very important role of hand washing. There's some opportunities that we can look at for worker training and monitoring to make sure that workers coming into food plants and food systems are healthy and able to do work safely. some cleaning and sanitation strategies, including enhanced sanitation, which is important for controlling COVID-19. And then what to do if you have exposed ill workers. If you have someone that becomes ill and has come to work, what are the strategies that you would need to take in order to make sure that person has time to heal and to protect the rest of the workforce? COVID-19, as we've commonly come to call the global pandemic, is also known as coronavirus disease. And coronaviruses are one of the largest family of viruses that cause disease in humans and animals. COVID-19 and the virus that causes it, SARS-CoV-2, is one of the most recently emerged or newest coronaviruses that we've discovered. Coronaviruses can cause very typical disease like a common cold, or can result in very severe respiratory diseases such as what we are seeing in the current pandemic. This particular virus was discovered in Wuhan, China in December of 2019. And as a result, nearly every country around the world has reported COVID-19 cases. To date, there's approximately 15.5 million cases of COVID-19, which has resulted in 635,000 deaths around the world. And we continue to see the number of cases climb globally. As I mentioned, the disease itself that we're experiencing as humans is called COVID-19. But it's actually caused by the virus termed SARS-CoV-2. And that name comes from severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, coronavirus 2. And it gets the number 2 because it's the second coronavirus discovered that results in severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS. And the first one was recognized in 2003. And so the most correct way of saying what the disease and etiological or causative agent of the pandemic is, it's SARS-CoV-2, that virus causes COVID-19 or coronavirus disease. And the picture that's displayed in this slide is a computer image of what the actual virus would look like under significant magnification. So the symptoms of coronavirus disease or COVID-19 are often displayed similar to a common cold, but what we're particularly worried about is how that disease advances to more acute respiratory failure. So some of the common symptoms of COVID-19 include a cough, a fever that's usually over 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, chills, muscle pain, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, unless that was already an underlying condition for you as an individual, sore throat, and then interestingly, loss of taste and smell. A number of individuals that have contracted COVID-19 have reported that they've lost their ability to taste and lost their ability to smell. Another symptom often associated with disease is a gastrointestinal disturbance, so diarrhea, which would make you wonder if this is actually a foodborne disease, and it is not, and we'll get into that in a moment. But these symptoms can range from very mild to very severe, and they usually appear within 2 to 4 days after you've been exposed to the virus. And so it's why there's a global campaign for usually 2 weeks of isolation. If you think you've been exposed to this virus, it may take up to 14 days for these symptoms to actually manifest. As I mentioned, individuals that contract COVID-19 may experience gastrointestinal distress, which we would commonly associate with a foodborne illness. However, COVID-19 is not a foodborne disease, and there's no evidence to date that substantiates that SARS-CoV-2 can actually be transmitted successfully and cause disease through food. And that's great news for the food industries and food systems, but what we're worried about is that we have so many workers or employees that become ill that they're not able to work, and we start to see influences in the food supply chain which could impact food security. Food safety. This is my favorite topic in the world. My research laboratory studies foodborne pathogens, and we train graduate students in this very discipline. So one reason to get out of bed every day is studying food safety, at least for me. It's important to define what food safety is, and really it has a number of definitions. One of the most common is that it's foods that are free from biological, chemical, and physical hazards that could actually cause disease. And that could be in animals or humans. We worry about food and we worry about feed for animals. Another definition, and one that applies maybe more to my everyday job here at Purdue as a faculty member, is the scientific discipline that describes the practices and processes that we need to ensure throughout the food supply to grow safe and then process safe foods. It's also the production, manufacturing, and processing, or the practices of creating foods in a safe manner. But what's really important to remember about food safety is that it is not a measurement of food quality or nutrition. Those are actually very independent aspects of our food. A food can be extremely low quality, it could be unnutritious or not good for us, but it could still be safe from a biological, chemical, and physical hazard standpoint. A product could be extremely high quality. You could have beautiful produce, but it may not be safe because we can't see things like E. coli or salmonella, and we certainly can't see pesticide or chemical residues on products without substantial testing. So again, keeping those terms differentiated is quite important. So how food safety actually interfaces with COVID-19 is it's kind of an extrapolated scenario. When we think about food security, which is important for everyone around the world in developed and developing economies, when we think of food security, a food has to be safe, it has to be nutritious, there has to be a sufficient supply of it, and people have to have access to that food. So if any one of those four circles is damaged, if we have a gap in safety, if a population can't access food, then we start to see changes or gaps in food security. And what COVID-19 has done in both developed and developing economies is it has started to disrupt food supply and access because people are sick. And that could be the people that are harvesting the foods or that are producing or manufacturing not able to come to work, or distributing those products. So if we start to have breakdowns in anywhere along the food supply chain, we disrupt access, supply, and not necessarily safety in this instance, but we disrupted the four major pillars of food security, which of course can cause significant unrest in populations. So again, COVID-19 is not a foodborne disease, but it does impact workers and the food supply chain. So the great news is we have no evidence that consuming contaminated food can result in actual disease. And the reason that is SARS-CoV-2, so again, the virus that causes COVID-19, is an enveloped virus. And that actually means it's easy or easier to inactivate or to destroy it using a lot of common strategies such as cleaning, sanitation, heat, and even drying out over time can disrupt this virus. So it's much more easy to inactivate than a non-enveloped virus. And an example of that would be a virus such as polio. We know that the pH or the acidity of our stomach inactivates SARS-CoV-2. So the likelihood that this virus could actually, if it were contaminated in food, that likelihood that it would actually be able to survive our natural stomach defense systems is very low. We also know that there are numerous disinfectants and sanitizers that are very effective against SARS-CoV-2, and that's great news. So most of our standard cleaning and sanitation practices are going to be very effective at disrupting this virus. So again, what we do need to think about from a COVID-19 standpoint and transmission as it occurs in food systems is how it impacts our employees and our workers themselves. Because if they're not able to come to work, or if you have a new group of employees that are less trained, that's where we start to compromise food safety. So SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 disease resulting from that virus is primarily transmitted from person to person. So not food to food, but in a number of our food production systems, we have a lot of people or a number of employees, and they often work very close together. So the primary route of transmission is through respiratory droplets. And each one of us is creating these droplets every time we breathe and every time we speak. And so we see an increase in those droplets if someone coughs, sneezes, or talks very excitedly. And those droplets that can land directly in the mouth or on the noses of people who are nearby. They can be directly inhaled into the lungs. And of course, the closer that people are together, the more likely that they're going to come into contact with those droplets or at a higher dose. And so it's how we've really gotten to this place of social distancing, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So there's really four major, scenarios where you'll see SARS-CoV-2 transmission that could result in decreasing likelihood of actually resulting in disease. So the closer two people stand, the more likely they are to get a larger inoculum of respiratory droplets. So being close together in a short range is a higher risk activity. It's also possible for SARS-CoV-2 to land on a surface. So it could be on a food contact surface or a work surface, which we would also define as a fomite. So it's possible for someone to touch a surface, transmit SARS-CoV-2, and then for me to touch that surface and transmit it to myself. So more of an indirect transmission that would involve a surface. And then there's also long-range airborne routes. So that transmission is through aerosols, so which are even smaller particles than respiratory droplets. They can be inhaled by people that are within range of someone who is infected with SARS-CoV-2. Of course, we worry about this because there's a significant body of evidence that people can be carriers of SARS-CoV-2, so they could have the viruses in their lungs and be transmitting them to others without symptoms. So asymptomatic carriage, which is really challenging because if someone doesn't feel poorly, they feel healthy, they don't know that they're still potentially transmitting that virus to others. So we've come up with around the world a number of strategies to help reduce COVID-19 transmission, one in public, but also specifically in food systems. And we've again introduced this word of social distancing as a new part of our vocabulary as one of the major strategies to actually stop this disease from spreading from human to human. We'll also talk a little bit about how to properly wear masks, of course, the importance of hand washing. We've known that's critical for food safety forever, but it also plays a critical role in preventing transmission of COVID-19. And then we'll talk about some other practical solutions that can help keep workers safe in food processing systems. So social distancing. Another way of thinking about it in a food system is worker distancing. Our goal is still to reduce the physical interaction or increase the space between people by maintaining at least 1.8 meters or around 6 feet between workers to help to reduce the spread of those respiratory droplets. Again, the farther away we can be from people, the less likelihood we are to actually interface with some of those droplets. So other aspects of social distancing, when we think about it in the context of food systems, if you have the space and the ability in your food processing plant or harvesting building, we encourage people to walk in the same direction and to minimize conversations in hallways. Again, every time we talk, sneeze, cough, we could be introducing these droplets into the air. And so keeping space and keeping directionality helps minimize our exposure to those, invisible droplets in the air. If it's possible without compromising safety from either insects or rodents or other pests, it's ideal to be able to prop open doors to improve airflow. We also want to minimize touching of common contact surfaces such as doorknobs. Those are often high touch areas, but if we can come up with strategies where doors can be pushed open with an elbow or opened with a foot, that helps reduce hand-to-hand or that fomite transmission. There's also a large push to increase the frequency of sanitation on common contact surfaces. Again, shared equipment, a door handle being a very classic example. So instead of maybe cleaning and sanitizing that surface once a day or every 4 hours, it might be accelerated to every 2 hours or in between individuals if necessary. There's also a need to increase space for breaks and people so we can de-densify, so reduce the number of people that are in a given space at any one time, again, to reduce the amount of droplets or respiratory droplets that are in the air. There's also a strategy that needs to be thought about. It's a larger investment, but that's to provide frequent up-to-date training for new employees, especially if you have onboarded new employees, on good manufacturing practices and social distancing. If you have a high turnover of employees, those individuals still need training, and they need enhanced training during this really challenging time of COVID-19. It's important to empower employees to recognize areas of risk and to encourage them to come to you to talk about, to identify areas that they think are a concern or could be an increased risk of transmission of COVID-19, and that they need a process in which they can report their illnesses and also those concerns to you so that those can be minimized, therefore minimizing exposure of others to COVID-19. A number of cultures around the world are used to wearing face masks, and there's a number that are not. And so the big cultural shifts of increasing face masks in public and at work is an interesting new hurdle, but it's a really important part of preventing COVID-19 in the workforce and to eventually, let's hope, stop this pandemic sooner than later. So we know that masks reduce airborne transmission because they're going to capture those respiratory droplets and to minimize the number of those droplets that are out in the air that could be exposing others. So if we look at the diagram below, which is provided by the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, we can have people that are infected, but as I mentioned, asymptomatic. So they're carriers of the virus, but they feel fine. But that virus is still being emitted in respiratory droplets if they cough or sneeze or when they talk. So the highest risk scenario is when you have an infected asymptomatic person that exposes yet another person that's not wearing a face mask. So in an ideal situation, if everyone that has the ability to wear face masks would all wear face masks, that reduces transmission of the viruses by droplets out into the air, and it reduces the number of droplets that you would be interfacing with as you naturally breathe. So we wear face masks to protect ourselves, but we really wear face masks to protect others. And so why we need systematic usage of them is really underscored by that point. So it's important to wear them in public settings, and it's important to wear them when you can't maintain 6 feet or 1.8 meters of distancing between individuals. And that can be difficult in food processing plants, and there need to be a reconsideration of how processing lines and production practices are configured in order to try to maximize the space between individuals. It's important to not put your face covering around your neck or on your forehead or under your nose. Really, the only effective way to wear a mask is covering both your nose and mouth, and then it's maintained under your chin. We don't want those respiratory droplets escaping around the mask. And if we're only covering our nose, they're still escaping out into common airspace. It's also important to not touch your face coverings with your hands. Your hands have touched a lot of surfaces and then can serve as a transmission vehicle from non-food contact surfaces or surfaces to your face and your mask, which increases your exposure or risk to the virus. If you do have to touch your face covering in order to adjust, you should wash your hands first or use a hand sanitizer in order to minimize the viral load that could be on your hands. So how to actually properly wear a face mask. As I mentioned, it does need to cover both your mouth and your nose. And you should really wash your hands first before putting on your mask. If you've been working or exposed in public places with common contact surfaces, it's important to reduce, again, the potential of transmitting the virus to yourself by touching near your face or nose. So wash your hands first. Then you would place your mask over your nose and mouth and secure it under your chin. And the goal by securing it under your chin is so that the face mask doesn't move, which means there's less need for you to adjust it throughout the day. So it should fit snugly against your face, and you should be able to still breathe easily. You would need to consider which type of mask to accommodate some individuals that might have greater challenges with some masks. Washing hands. It's one of the biggest things we can do to prevent foodborne disease and also the transmission of COVID-19. And it's a really simple process, but it does take time. about 20 seconds ideally of scrubbing. So first you'd want to wet your hands with clean running water, lather your hands with soap and rub them together, and scrub between your hands, the palms, the back of your hands, and around your fingernails for at least 20 seconds. It's amazing how many small parts of our hands we can forget if we don't take that 20 seconds of time to genuinely scrub our hands. At that point, we're now ready to rinse them with clean water and then dry with a clean towel, or you can air dry them, either way. If you don't have access to soap or water, using an alcohol-based sanitizer that's at least 60% alcohol is a suitable substitution in this case. I always prefer soap and water, but again, it is a nice strategy if you don't have access to soap and water. When it comes to social distancing in food processing facilities, we've seen big COVID-19 outbreaks occur, at least in the United States, because workers are very close together because of the nature of the food processing plant and the nature of their work. And our regulatory agencies do recognize that it could be very difficult to put a full 6 feet between individuals, but they're encouraging manufacturers to optimize or to maximize the amount of space that possible between individuals, or they're adding physical barriers such as plexiglass between individuals to serve as a physical barrier of those air droplets between individuals. It's a good strategy for each individual company and each unique site to do a thorough inspection of your facility to identify opportunities where you can maximize social distancing, or to, again, address maybe addition of plexiglass or physical barriers between individuals where 6 feet of separation or 1.8 meters is really not possible. Cleaning and sanitation is absolutely critical, not only to food safety, but also to minimizing transmission of COVID-19 and maintaining worker safety. Sanitation as a whole is a very big discipline, and what it really means is it's referring to facilities, hygienic practices, controlling cross-contamination, the fundamentals of cleaning and sanitizing, temperature control of the foods themselves, manufacturing operations, so how the foods are actually produced, calibrating some of the equipment that we use routinely to maintain safety and quality of foods, controlling other pests such as insects and rodents, and then actual execution of a recall program should that be required. And so when we take all of these individual pieces of food production together, we would consider that a part of a comprehensive sanitation program. Why is this necessary? Well, sanitation is really at the heart of both product safety. So safety has to be first. We can't produce unsafe foods. We can produce a variety of quality, but they always have to be safe. And that's important one for the consumer, but those employees can become consumers, and it's also important for environmental safety. Sanitation is necessary to produce a quality product. There's a number of organisms that can enter foods that will spoil foods, which will reduce their quality. It won't necessarily be unsafe, but you certainly won't have as many customers interested in buying that food. Sanitation is also mandatory in most regulatory systems, and there are specific guidance both at local and regional levels, national, and certainly international levels that are expected levels of sanitation that are necessary in order for foods to actually enter commerce. And so really a number of reasons why sanitation is necessary. It's pretty straightforward, but it's also one of the most challenging pieces of producing food. It's hard work, and not everybody appreciates how important it really is. But when we think about sanitation at the very foundational level, what we're most often talking about is cleaning and sanitizing. And it's really important to recognize that there are very big differences in cleaning versus sanitizing, and then versus disinfecting. They're actually all very distinct steps or have distinct expectations of what we're trying to achieve. So when we clean a surface, often with soap and water, for example, our goal is to remove visible soil, so visible food particles or debris, or what we might call soils, from a surface. And cleaning removes about 90% or more of our microbial hazards. So the organisms that could cause disease in humans are almost, the vast majority are removed by cleaning. Cleaning then gets us ready, gets our surface, whether it's a food contact surface or a non-food contact surface, actually ready for the next step in our process, which is actual sanitizing or disinfecting, depending on what level of microbial kill we're hoping to achieve. So it's important to remember you can't sanitize a dirty surface. It has to be cleaned first in order for that sanitizer to actually work. There is a difference between sanitizers and disinfectants and what their ultimate goal is. And really, I think the simplest definition between the two is that disinfectants provide a higher level of demonstrated microbial kill than sanitizers. Sanitizers are used to prepare a surface to a hygienic or healthy or safe level. The expectation from a disinfectant is that it truly destroys or irreversibly inactivates bacteria, fungus, and viruses. There are currently no sanitizer products that actually have a disinfectant claim in the United States for food and non-food contact surfaces. So if we were truly trying to inactivate really challenging viruses, we would need to use a disinfectant. And again, that's U.S. policy as written by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which oversees approval and use instructions for cleaners, sanitizers, and disinfectants. We have a number of strategies that we can use to remove microbes and viruses from surfaces. We can use a chemical strategy or chemical sanitation or thermal sanitation. So heat is a really effective way to inactivate microbes as well. So some of the common chemical sanitizers and disinfectants are chlorine-based, quaternary ammonia compounds, iodine sanitizers, and peroxyacetic acid, or PAA. They vary in the concentration that needs to be used. They vary in the amount of contact time, so the length of time that a surface is exposed to the chemical in order to achieve microbial kill. And they certainly vary in the appropriate types of surfaces that they should be used on. If we think about chlorine, for example, it's an extremely effective sanitizer and disinfectant. But if we use chlorine routinely on stainless steel, you'll start to see pitting and destruction of stainless steel surfaces from that sanitizer or disinfectant, which can actually lead to bigger problems. If you start to destroy your equipment, you can create opportunities for microbes to find their way into those pits, to set up niches, and then have continuous contamination. So there are certain strategies that need to be considered when it comes to selection of which chemistry to use to inactivate microbes. Thermal sanitation can be done either through hot water, dry heat, and even steam sterilization. Again, it's a function of getting a surface up to a temperature and for a defined amount of time. If you're using dry heat sterilization, it does take more time, up to 2 hours, if you're able to reach a final temperature of the entire surface or equipment of 160 degrees Celsius. Two really important aspects of sanitizers and disinfectants, we typically think about this in the context of chemical sanitizers and disinfectants, but the first is time. Every labeled product, at least in the United States, that is defined as a sanitizer or disinfectant has specific use guidance that says the amount of time that the product needs to be on the surface and at what concentration. And those range widely among products and among their intended goal of kill. So sanitizers require less time. Disinfectants require more time typically, because we're expecting them to inactivate more microbes or a more significant level of kill compared to a sanitizer. So our contact time ranges from 30 seconds up to 10 minutes, where 10 minutes often reflects disinfectant levels. And the time is very product dependent. Some of our disinfectants, such as chlorine, take a lot less time than other products, such as quaternary ammonium compounds. The other major driver of sanitizer or disinfectant efficacy is concentration. So a product will only perform as a sanitizer or disinfectant if the chemistry is at the proper concentration. And what we know, many manufacturers, when they source their disinfectants, they come in very concentrated forms. They need to be diluted to the label use instructions in order for them to be effective. At that point, then you're ready to consider time to make sure you've achieved your intended level of microbial inactivation. Because SARS-CoV-2, the organism that causes COVID-19, is actually quite new, only discovered in December of 2019, there aren't a lot of demonstrated bench scientific evidence of which sanitizers or disinfectants can work against that particular virus. However, because it is enveloped, we know that it's very easy to inactivate. And the United States guidance for the food industry is to select agents or select chemistries for sanitizers and disinfectants from what are called List N, or disinfectants for use against SARS-CoV-2. So while there's current ongoing research to demonstrate the efficacy of sanitizers on the N list, which include a number of products such as chlorine, quaternary ammonium, and iodine, it's very, very highly expected that those products will work extremely well, just because this virus, outside of a host, is actually really quite fragile and easy to disrupt with these chemistries. So sanitation steps for food contact surfaces, which would also apply to non-food contact surfaces, but we're most concerned about when it comes to food safety and then human-to-human transmission from a fomite standpoint of COVID-19, is a 4-step process to maintain the safety of those surfaces. The first is to wash, and that comes back to our idea of cleaning first. We want to remove visible soils from those surfaces. At that point, we would then rinse those soils away, which has prepared our surface for our next step of sanitizing. And in this diagram, one example of that is using bleach or chlorine. It does underscore here that it needs to be at the appropriate concentration. It has to stay in contact with the surface for a defined amount of time, and it may need to be rinsed away depending on which sanitizer is actually used. And at that point, then we allow our surfaces to air dry. One of the most effective ways to maintain safety in a food processing environment after cleaning and sanitation process is to dry the environment out as best as possible. Not necessarily the case for viruses that need a host in order to reproduce, but our microbes that cause challenges in food safety and food quality love wet environments. So the drier we can make the environment and the less water we can keep in those environments, the safer and higher quality our products will be. So as far as guidance to the food industry, when we look at frequently touched surfaces, especially through the lens of COVID-19, this is a list of surfaces that are frequently touched that may need enhanced sanitation in this wake of COVID-19. So using a bucket brush and sanitizing spray, we really should consider cleaning and sanitizing stainless tabletops, door handles, tubs, cases, carts that might help move product, wheels, handles, and garbage lids where people might be touching those surfaces frequently. So a bucket and brush, so our cleaning step, followed by sanitizing spray, which could be, again, chlorine, quaternary ammonia, or iodines, typically not iodines, but an option, would then fall on these surfaces at enhanced frequency. This is a very expansive list and may not apply to all surfaces in your processing facility, but other frequently touched surfaces that could actually be cleaned and sanitized using wipes are listed here. So we often forget about some of the things we rarely clean or sanitize. A cell phone is one great example, or our chargers, or pens that are shared for documentation during food processing. Those are all frequently touched surfaces that need to be considered a transmission point, one to prevent foodborne illness, but also the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 resulting in COVID-19. This is a really complex diagram, but taking time with this is a really important way to think about how to protect the safety of the workforce and maintain food security through keeping the workforce and food being produced. So this is a decision tree for food industry personnel and how to consider what to do in the event you have a worker that becomes sick or a worker that has been exposed. So on the left is a comprehensive list of the symptoms that are associated with COVID-19. As I'd mentioned, a fever such as that above 100 0.4 Fahrenheit, muscle pain, sore throat, gastrointestinal problems, cough, chest pain. All of those are symptoms that could trigger the first step of the decision tree of whether or not an employee should come to work or when that employee should return to work. So in scenario number one, our employee develops symptoms at home or at work. And really, it begins our decision-making steps of whether or not that individual should actually stay at work, or if they are indeed at risk of developing COVID-19, and that we would need that individual to stay at home. And so I would encourage you to take some time with these scenarios where you look at both symptoms, who and what that person has been in contact with, and what precautions would need to be taken for that individual in order for them to recover and to not infect others. So again, COVID-19 is not a foodborne illness. It does impact food security, however, because it disrupts that very delicate balance of our four major aspects of food production: that food is safe, that it's nutritious, we have a sufficient supply, and the individuals have access to it. Because this is such a highly infectious disease, and because it infects a very wide range of individuals, the workforce and their ability to come to work is certainly threatened by this disease, which means we then start to disrupt a sufficient food supply and individuals' access to it. So I hope you'll find that these strategies are straightforward and relatively simple to achieve to help reduce the risk of COVID-19 and to protect the workforce and therefore food safety. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have at this time.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Honor, for your have questions on your presentation on this topic. The first one is, what can food companies do to convince their customers that their products do not contain COVID-19?
Well, that's a great question, Alan. Some of the early things that a company can do are to be very transparent about the strategies that they're taking with their workforce to minimize the number of employees perhaps in a confined space at any one given time. There's employee temperature testing, which has actually become quite common, as has routine COVID testing if that happens to be available in your area. And there's certainly a wide distribution of availability of individual testing. But also maintaining food safety and quality standards is a major part. Even though there might be a disruption in the workforce, finding ways to maintain safety and quality standards underscores a company's commitment to safety across the board.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, what are some cost-effective methods or items that make a big difference with food safety? For some companies, resources are limited. It might be a low priority for management, or the company lacks expertise on food safety.
Right, that's also an excellent question. Really, what we've found both in small-scale production and large-scale production in the United States is that it's really a manager's commitment to food safety that drives the entire food safety agenda for the entire company. So it's really a top-down, so owner or manager down all the way to the individual. And so having that food safety culture or commitment and behavior to food safety is key. Some very practical things that can be done as a part of that commitment to food safety culture and behavior is hand washing. We can get a really good sense of food safety quality from the very simple practice of hand washing. So doing it as needed, creating environments, sinks that are available for employees that are easy to access is really quite key. Or finding, again, an alternative if you don't have access to water. If you have a safe hand sanitizer, that would be certainly a reasonable alternative. Go ahead.
Go ahead and finish your answer.
Just one other thing, again, just finding ways to socially distance, and that could be, change small modifications to production lines or how foods are being handled in a processing facility is one very can be cost effective and straightforward way to minimize transmission.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, COVID cannot be transmitted through the food itself, but can COVID be transmitted through packaging or the transportation of the product from the factory to the warehouse to the retailer?
All right, so that's a really interesting and emerging situation that we're seeing across the globe is instances of where there might be traces of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV to the virus itself on packaging materials. To date, there is no evidence that an individual can become sick from transmission from food or from the packaging. And so the question remains is when you're testing a product package, what are you testing for? You're testing for a component of that virus. It doesn't mean that that virus is actually viable and could cause disease. There's a trace of it there. We know it's very easily inactivated. But again, underscoring to date, there's no evidence that it can be transmitted through food. This is a respiratory disease, so it's the water droplets from one human to another that really is the highest risk situation.
Okay, thank you. And one final question is, what are some good online resources for food safety materials that are suitable for developing and emerging markets where they may not have laboratories or the latest resources for food safety?
Certainly. I think one of the most comprehensive sites for the food industry at this time is Cornell University. It really focuses on COVID-19. Now you'll find that a number of those resources are very US-centric and for large-scale manufacturing. However, the USAID Food Safety Innovation Lab, Feed the Future Food Safety Innovation Lab, which I'm very fortunate to be the director of, we're launching an initiative with Cornell University to support smaller and developing economy strategies for COVID. And so at this point in time, Senegal, Bangladesh, Kenya, and Cambodia and Nepal, we're currently supporting, but you'll find the contact information for those experts on the Cornell website, which are engaging directly in developing economies to look at solutions for these specific conditions.
Okay, thank you. This ends the Q&A session. Thank you so much for the audience for your good questions and for Dr. Oliver for sharing her expertise. Next, I'd like to introduce Roberta Simpson-Dolbear with her closing comments. Roberta is an Illinois soybean farmer and is the new vice chair of the WISHH committee.
Hello, my name is Roberta Simpson-Dolbear, and I am a soybean farmer from Nebo, Illinois, which is just north of St. Louis, Missouri. Today's topic of food safety is important to me, and it is also key to U.S. soybean growers. In 2019, my husband and I, along with U.S. soybean growers across the country, produced more than 121 million metric tons of soybeans. To put that in perspective, this would fill more than 60,000 barges, or 4.6 million semis, or 1.2 million railroad cars. Illinois ranks #1 in U.S. soybean production. The next time you visit the grocery store, take a moment to look at the ingredients of the food items you are purchasing. I think you may be surprised to see how many of them contain soybean oil or soy protein. I mention this because I want you to know that our family eats our soybeans too. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports that 96% of the U.S. farms are still family-owned. What we offer to global customers is the same quality as what our families and our own livestock consume. We make sure that the fertilizers and weed control we use in our farms are safe for everyone. U.S. soybean farmers take pride in the crop we grow each year, and we take steps to ensure its quality from the time it's planted until we deliver it to the grain elevator or processor. U.S. farmers have invested millions of dollars in grain storage to protect the quality and safety of our soybeans. It's important that we maintain the quality soybeans we worked so hard to grow. On our own farms, we will sometimes store each year up to 40,000 bushels of the soybeans grown. We closely monitor the moisture level and temperature of the soybeans that we store to maintain the quality of the beans until we deliver them to the grain elevator. Being able to store our soybeans is also an important marketing tool for our family, so we can sell them when the customers are ready for our crop. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I hope you can see from our family's investment in the safety and quality of our grain that we want to have a long-term relationship with WISHH strategic partners.
All right. Thank you, Roberta, for your closing comments on how U.S. soybean farmers help produce high quality and safe soybeans that are eventually used by U.S. and overseas customers. If you have any further questions about today's webinar or like to reach out to one of our experts, please email us at wish@soy.org, as you see on the bottom of the screen there. And in a moment, you'll be directed to a webinar or to a survey at the end of this webinar. Please take the time to fill this out. This information will help us plan future WISH activities and how to improve content that will help you be a better consumer of soy. And I hope you found today's webinar helpful and informative. And I hope that helps you develop or strengthen your company's food safety plan. Thank you again for taking the time to join us for this webinar on food safety. And from all of us at WISH, we hope everyone continues to stay safe during these turbulent times. Thank you.